No questions, seems. So if I may, then I would like to ask the question to the panelists. We can start with Jan Ziedic. Armand talked about Hugo, and you talked about the language resources. So what are the next steps for Hugo? Well, first of all, we are expecting, we're hoping for support from politicians and other supporters who've supported this project. We'd like to launch the next phase, or the next stage in 2016. We'll have the support, we'll do that, just that. And the project has to be implemented within a very short time frame, within 3 years. We have all the basics on the ground, but we need to clear some of the practicalities. We need to introduce new language combinations. We need to also continue compiling language resources. We also need to continue strengthening the cooperation with public institutions, and we need to improve the data collection from the public institutions. As we heard today, some of the data that is held by the public institutions is very important or essential to our resources and to our system. So these are the things that we'll focus on. Jan, in a previous panel discussion where you took part, there were some interesting examples of how to integrate Hugo in your portals, public portals, and I would like to encourage and invite everyone to think about the possible integration of Hugo in their web pages.
I'll switch to English to make it easier for everyone, including myself. Saila, you've heard a lot about the Hugo LV as an interesting case study. What has the Commission learned? I mean, this is a great example of machine translation being used by a public sector to facilitate multilingual communication. It's a great example of machine translation being integrated into e-services to expand access to information. How does the Commission, how have you seen this as a case study, and what has the Commission learned from this, and how has this helped in considering or thinking about the expansion of the CEF.at infrastructure?
As you said, it's an excellent sort of best practice to be shown to others as an example what can be done on the national level. And I think there's a lot of room for synergies with CEF.at and Hugo. So this is an excellent example case also for you who are going to organize more workshops in other countries. This could be perhaps included somehow as an example. And what I especially liked when I listened to your presentations on the language resources was the idea of not only talking about English plus your language, but also languages of your neighboring countries. Like if you have language resources of parallel corpora in Latvian and Lithuanian, this is a fantastic resource that benefits you most of all. So I think this is something to be kept in mind also in the future workshops, that there is a considerable potential for local rare language pair improvements in the system.
Varbūt kādi jautājumi?
Do we have any questions regarding language resources? We heard a lot about the particular steps that we need to make in order to improve our language resources, how to provide data, and what is the format of data. Maybe some of you who are responsible for databases or responsible for the portals, or if you're administrating different web pages, maybe you have questions regarding your involvement, engagement, and contribution, or how you could help create this automated translation infrastructure framework. Well, if I may, to sort of kickstart the discussion, geographical information or geographical data was an interesting issue. We have Geospatial Agency representative participating in this workshop, and I know that this Geospatial Agency has quite good data. I mean, they have quite solid body of data. that they've compiled over time. And if you are ready to share your experience or your data, thus furthering automated translation in Europe, it would be nice to hear from you as well. I mean, the Geospatial Agency representatives who would like to take the floor. This, by the way, discussion is not being recorded, so it will not be posted online, so you feel free to speak from your heart and mind. This is indeed, yes, an open discussion, a Q&A session where you can ask your questions. You know, this is a new initiative that has been recently launched or presented. It's only the third workshop of a kind organized in one of the member states. So we have a lot of questions, and you must have a lot of questions as well. So this is a very good opportunity to ask questions. What should I do with my resources and data, and how to, you know, provide them, and what practical steps should I take, and so on and so forth. We also heard about language resources, you know, that are available out there. Does anyone have any ideas? I mean, is anyone left out of this sort of system? Should anyone else be approached in the process of gathering those language resources? Anyone who's not present here? Well, I came to a conclusion that, you know, we are responsible for the outcome or for the end product, the translation and its quality. So we heard it throughout the discussion that we should use all the available resources or sources or options in order to produce a quality translation. And sometimes, you know, when we see a translation, a good translation, we basically reuse it further. And nevertheless, you know, if it's a faulty one, then we should avoid it being copied, because quite often we hear that the terms have been used wrongly, and that there are misinterpretations and mistranslations and so on and so forth. So how to avoid this copying of low-quality data? Yeah, a very good question. Can we make use of low-quality data, of mistranslations and so on and so forth? Can it be used in any way? Can it benefit? Yeah, well, that's a very good comment, by the way. We must be aware of the fact that machine translation is a new tool. It does not have similar tools. It never had. I mean, this is something absolutely new. We know what translators can do. They can produce very good translations. Sometimes, of course, they can also produce bad translations. But we must be aware of the fact that technologies are far behind human capabilities. The statistical methods, they have great advantages. They are able to, you know, learn things, but, you know, their learning abilities sort of is limited. No matter how much they learn from those texts, they will never able to sort of crunch the essence of those texts. They'll never be able to understand you know, some undercurrents, read between the lines. And there are cases when, you know, machine translation, however, is much more efficient than a human translation if you're dealing with a big text, large volumes of information, or if it's too expensive, if the time for translation is short, and so on and so forth. So in public sector, in the commercial, and the business circles, people are constantly looking for better applications of machine translation tools. It's important to make sure that if this data is published, if data is provided to the users of e-services, you must have a very clear notice that, you know, you need to attach a notice to that this machine translation that cannot be fully trusted. So that such notice or a remark, you can't just, you know, publish anything, because you can't fully rely on machine translation, because there may be errors in machine translation. But with a due notice, the user can then decide to what extent to trust the machine translation and how to use the machine translation. because those machine translations are very good for you to select, texts, for you to be able to understand what you need out of a bulk of texts or documents, but it's no good for sort of legal purposes when you need to analyze, laws and understand how provisions sort of relate to each other. I think it's very good for the names of institutions because we have different variations of the names of institutions, and sometimes, translators tend to call them differently. Those official names could be very efficiently translated by machine translation. Those that are approved, for example, biodiversity, there are several, say, translations for that. So there's biodiversity as well as, other options as well, and imprecise translations as well provided. Those parallel translations should be eliminated in some cases where there is only one sort of proper correct translation that might greatly benefit the translators who translated, for example, the texts of the European Court of Human Rights and so on and so forth. They are dealing with names of institutions and so on and so forth. In particular, that program, the machine translation software, could, help with those things. The CF.AT is trying to create an automated translation infrastructure that produces the best translations that can be used by public institutions. When we had the Digital Agenda Assembly here in Riga in June, I talked about this project with a representative of a tech company, and they said, oh yeah, it's a Google Translate on steroids. So the question to Saila.
F.AT. What does Google think about TEF.AT? Do they have an opinion or a comment on this?
Not that I have heard of. Yeah.
Well, if I may, I'd like to comment regarding, the opinion of Google. It's nice that the European Commission and services understand the role and the importance of languages. I should say that Google was ahead of us in this regard. They understood the importance or the value of languages several years earlier, and they went to the European services and they got the hold of some valuable data that helped them improve their machine translation tool. The European Patent Office, which is not the EU sort of service, but it's a European agency or institution, they gave Google their patent texts in different languages, which helped immensely Google to improve their machine translation or automated translation system. And that's one example how you can improve the quality of your machine translations. And that sort of led the EU to think about the better use of its own resources. There are no questions from the hall. I would like to invite all the panelists to give us the remarks, and we'll start with Jan Zedic. What's your takeaway from today's workshop conference? Any lessons learned? Any inspirations? What are your conclusions in general? Well, when you go to any language technology seminar or workshop, you learn a lot of new things. And as Armand mentioned, Culture Information Center, System Center, was mainly, involved. Its core business was digitalization of cultural heritage and digitalization in general, whereas machine translation is something absolutely novel to us. It's absolutely new to us. And this workshop helped me greatly to understand better who are the stakeholders here in Latvia as well as in Europe, and how we could cooperate better in future. Thank you.
A couple words about something you learned today you didn't know, and then a few sort of closing remarks.
I think I heard a lot of very interesting things, both in terms of resources and also the tools that you have, and also the problems that you are facing, which are not let's say, I have worked as a terminologist before, and I'm very much familiar with all these problems with validating terminology and finding the good way of saying that this is the one to be used, and that there are like different you have different ratings for terms and so on. And this is a huge underlying work that has to be also done in order to achieve good quality machine translation. But I think overall you are very advanced, both in terms of taking up machine translation and plugging it into e-services, and you also have a lot of valuable resources. And I think it's important that you work together for your own language in order to benefit the most. So this is really I would say, the main message.
Okay, thank you, Saila, and thank you for traveling to Riga today to speak with us. Andrei, kādi nākamie soļi un...
Andres, what would be the next steps and what would be your concluding words? I think there is a contemplative silence in the auditorium here, and that might speak volumes for the fact that this area, this field, is quite complicated and the challenge is quite big. So we stand this risk of either falling into one or the other ditches that are running along the way. The one is to hope that machine translation will solve all problems, and such hopes may lead to great disappointment. Yes, machine translation has great advantages, but also significant shortcomings. And the other ditch would be just giving into pessimism, because this is a complicated area, and we saw that, at least in terms of terminology, there are challenges. And there are challenges also in other areas, data, corpora, and so on. So solving these challenges at the EU level is an even bigger challenge. However, we should not be afraid of them. It is very important to set ambitious goals, and implementation or achievement of goals begins with cooperation, engagement, listening to each other, identifying best practice, and so on. And I am confident that through such cooperation at the Latvian level, at the European level, we can achieve outstanding results. Maybe it won't come as quickly and easily as we would like the results to come, but this is a necessary work that we need to carry out. And finally, I would like to thank our cooperation partners who engage in organizing this event, the representation of the European Commission, particularly Andris Kužnieks and Uldis Priede. Also colleagues from the ELRC consortium, as well as representatives who were here, the European Commission, Saila, Rinne, for coming to this seminar and for telling us many interesting centers. And I would also like to thank Culture Information Center, Armand Smaguane and Jānis Ziediņš. And certainly we thank you all for your participation, for your interest. And I hope and look forward for successful cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Jā, paldies jums visiem.
Thank you all. Thank you all. If you have any questions, then you are welcome to visit the consortium website. And the contact point in Latvia for ELRC is the Culture Information Center, as well as you can contact Tilde. But for now, thank you and goodbye.